Since this is the image I used for the series, the two images, I thought we could linger on them a little bit. I don't know if you've been to the Louvre, but this is one of my favorite piece in the Louvre, frankly. This is Eros awakening Psyche after she comes out of Hades. It's an incredible sculpture in a little corner of the Louvre. Lots of energy in it, lots of passion. And then this is a modern interpretation. This is in the National Galleries of Scotland by Calum Colvin. And it's Cupid and Psyche again. I like that very much. All right, let's get into it. The origin of the story. So this Cupid and Psyche story comes from one of my favorite books in the world. In fact, if you were here last year and came to my Second Saturday talk, you heard me talk at length about a book called Metamorphoses, or more popularly known as The Golden Ass. All right, so this is just a great story by Lucius Apuleius around the second century, in Rome. Wonderful story of a common man, a Milesian man, who tells the tale of how he became an ass. And he became an ass by dabbling in witchcraft that he didn't really know about. His girlfriend said she knew about it, but all she knew was that she had seen this witch do something. And so, being the brilliant man he was, he said, "Turn me into a bird, my love." And she's like, "All right, yeah, I guess I can do that. I saw it once." And so, of course, she turns him into an ass. And this is actually the earliest form of the novel, a kind of satire even. So it's a very lively novel that I encourage you to read. Books 4 through 6 of this novel are the story of Cupid and Psyche. You may hear me say Eros or Cupid. They're the same figure. I just generally prefer the Greek names, but Cupid is the Roman name. Takes up 1/4 of the novel, this story of Cupid and Psyche. And we'll come back to this. This is kind of interesting in that you have this tale. See the pun there, Charlie? This tale of an ass? No? Okay. Sorry, I'm not on your level with the puns. I'm trying. You have this tale of an ass who becomes transformed ultimately he becomes transformed into an ass. Then he spends the whole novel trying to unass himself. And he knows, that should be a verb, shouldn't it? Okay. He knows he has to eat roses that are dedicated to the cult of Isis, so he just goes around eating roses wherever he finds them. But of course, not any rose is dedicated to Isis. And finally, he eats some roses. He comes upon a procession of Isis devotees, and he eats those roses, and he turns back into a human being. And in fact, he becomes a priest of Isis. And so the book is called The Golden Ass, but it's also called The Metamorphoses, the changes. Right? You may also know of Ovid, another Roman writer, who wrote a book called Metamorphoses. So there's this very keen interest in change, in transformation. And in fact, Ovid's book is very long. It's where we get most of our myths from Greece and Rome, the ones that we know, because he just compiled them all under the notion of change, metamorphosis. This story, so I want you to know the context, right? So what's happened here is the Golden Ass, Lucian, has he's gone from misfortune to misfortune, and he's met a woman named Charity, and so these are allegorical names as well. He's met a woman named Charity who was on her way to her wedding, and she was abducted and raped by a gang of robbers, and they are now being held in a cave. And there's an old woman there who's the servant of the robbers, and Charity is going on and on about what happened to her, as you might expect. She was supposed to be at her wedding. Now she's in a cave with these robbers. She's been assaulted, and she's saying, woe is me. And she's right, woe is her. So the old woman there tells her the story of Eros and Psyche, right? So the implication here is transformation, metamorphosis, right? And that's the larger context. So now let me tell you the story. This is my favorite part. I just get to tell you the story. It's so cool. There was a king and a queen, and they had three beautiful daughters. One daughter was more beautiful than the others, and her name was Psyche. And let's just go ahead and say that's the Greek word for soul. Really, it's etymologically closer to breath, but it comes across as soul. So already being invited into an allegorical reading here. So the other two sisters get married. Psyche does not, even though she's the most beautiful woman in the land, maybe because she's the most beautiful woman in the land. In fact, people began to worship Psyche instead of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Well, if you know anything about Greek gods, if you know anything about Greek goddesses, they get jealous, right? Greek gods are irascible and go off at the slightest provocation. Greek goddesses get jealous. It's what started the whole Trojan War. But let's not get into that. She orders her son, Eros, to prick Psyche with an arrow so that she will fall in love with a monster. Right? Eros is pricked by his own arrow. We could spend all night on that, couldn't we? Eros is pricked by his own arrow, and so he falls in love with Psyche. This is bad. This is going to be, his mother's jealous already. She sends him to ensure that Psyche falls in love with a monster, and now he's in love with her. This is really bad. Psyche's parents, on the other hand, are distraught. They don't know why their most beautiful daughter is not married. Their other two daughters are married. They're doing fine. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They're following the script. So they consult the oracle of Apollo. And the oracle tells them that their daughter is destined to be the bride of no mortal lover. Uh-oh. So they realize that she's going to be married to a monster. And we know monsters, right? Because we studied the Theogony and other Greek myths. So he says her future husband, this monster, awaits her on the top of the mountain. He's a monster whom neither the gods nor men can resist. And Psyche, conscious of the mistakes of her mortal kingdom for praising her so highly, so even then women were blaming themselves for things that weren't their fault, she follows the oracle's advice and basically gets dressed in marriage and funeral attire, because this is a marriage to death. This is a marriage to a monster. And the text says, they go to the top of this hill where she is to wait for this monster to be married and to die. And the text says this: meanwhile, Psyche, on the topmost summit, frightened, trembling, and in tears, was lifted by a gentle breeze, a softly whispering zephyr, stirring her dress around her and causing it to billow, its tranquil breath carrying her slowly down the high cliff slopes to the valley below, where it laid her tenderly on a bed of flowering turf. See, that's the first novel. This is one of the first novels. So you can hear that already. Great attention to prose and to sentences. So she goes to this magnificent palace. Everything's laid out for her. Food, servants, everything she needs she's taken care of. and she hears this voice. It's clearly a divine place. It's clearly a sacred place. And she determines that this is probably where she's going to be. Then she hears a voice, which is her new husband. And her new husband visits her at night, and they have sex. Now, Psyche's probably a young girl, so this is a consummation. This is a loss of virginity. He makes love to her, that she makes love to him in the darkness. But she still doesn't know that anything's different. She was told, the oracle said she was going to be married to a monster. So she's very confused right now. She's in this palace. She has these servants. Everything that she needs appears as she needs it. She is married. She has sex every night with this being that she cannot see. So it's reasonable for her to assume that this is indeed a monster. So she doesn't know. Then the text says, things transpired thus for many a night, and through constant habit, as nature dictates, her new state accustomed her to its pleasures. And that sound of mysterious whispering of her husband consoled her solitude. And in fact, he tells her, this is all good. There's only one condition. Oh my God, have we heard that line before? There's only one condition. You cannot see me. You cannot see me in the light. Okay. So her two sisters visit. She asks if her two sisters can visit. Well, in fact, she asks Eros that, but their sisters are coming to the cliff to grieve anyway. So they're grieving the loss of Psyche, their sister. As you'll see, they're not grieving too much. In fact, Psyche sees them. She has permission to go down to them, and she brings them to her new home. So they're there to grieve. They think she's dead. They're not too sorry she's dead. She was the most beautiful of them. And so she takes them now to this palace, and they're like, what is going on? And of course, they become jealous. And say, you know what? This may seem all right, but it's not. Because it's clear that your husband is a monster. It's not clear at all. In fact, all indications are otherwise. But this is jealousy speaking. And sisters, I guess, can be mean sometimes. So they try to convince Psyche that she's got to find out what's happening here. She can't be the wife, the lover of a monster. They convince her to see him and to kill him. To see and to kill. And so they lay this out. They said, look, you need a knife in one hand and a lamp in another. And so you hold the lamp, and as soon as you see him, you strike. Here's the sisters. Oh, blind, cruel, iniquitous fortune, cried one. Is it your pleasure that we, daughters of the very same parents, should suffer so different a fate from you? Are we, the elder, to live like exiles, far from family, bound as slaves to foreign husbands, exiled from home and country, while you, the youngest, the last creation of our mother's exhausted womb, acquire such wealth and a god of a husband? I love this. Psyche was left alone, except that a woman driven by hostile furies is never alone. In her grief, she ebbed and flowed like the ocean tide. Though the scheme was decided and she determined, still as she drew towards the act itself, she wavered, confused in mind. Torn by the countless conflicting emotions the situation prompted, she prepared and delayed, dared and feared, despaired and felt anger, while hardest of all to endure, she hated, hated the beast and loved the husband. Hated the beast and loved the husband, embodied in a single form. Yet as evening led toward night, She readied all needed for the wicked crime with frantic haste. Night fell, and her husband came, and after love skirmishes, that's how they wrote back then, love skirmishes, and struggles, he dropped into a deep sleep. A single drop of oil falls from Psyche's lamp as she looks at his face, waking him, and Eros, in all his majestic beauty, flees their home and is distressed by her betrayal. Psyche, distressed herself, goes in search of her husband, traveling for many days until she comes to the temple of Ceres, the goddess of grain. Here's how the text describes that event. The pain roused him from sleep, and seeing that I was armed with flame and steel, he cried, "For your wicked crime, you are banished from my bed. Take what is yours and go. I shall embrace your sister now." He spoke your name formally in holy matrimony. Then he ordered Zephyr to drive me from the palace. All right, so exile. So she's gone now from the palace. She's got a lot of ups and downs, literally. So she's beautiful. She's born beautiful. She becomes the envy of everyone, including her sisters. She's consigned to marry a monster. She goes to the cliff to marry the monster. She could have fallen off the cliff, but a Zephyr wind comes and takes her to a palace, a kind of, I was going to say an Eden, but I don't want to mix the streams here. She goes to a place, a beautiful place, a god's place, and then she screws that up too because she listened to her jealous sisters. She's discovered in the wilderness by Pan, who recognizes the signs of passion upon her. She acknowledges his divinity and then begins to wander the earth. Psyche visits first one sister, then the other. Both are seized with renewed envy. Okay, so she's lost everything. They're still envious of her because she had a god for a husband. Each sister attempts to offer herself as a replacement for Eros's wife. And so they climb the rocky cliff and wait for the Zephyr wind, but it doesn't come. They fall to their deaths. Yeah, a brutal death, the text says. Sweetest Psyche, this is from the text, sweetest Psyche, he said, this is Eros, my dear wife, cruel fortune threatens you with deadly danger, which I want you to guard against in utmost care. Your sisters think you dead, and troubled by this, they'll soon come to the cliff top. When they do, if you should chance hear their lament, don't answer or even look in their direction, or you'll cause me the bitterest pain and bring ruin upon yourself. She wanders into the temple of Ceres, the goddess of grain, of the harvest. You can still see, in the comparative mythology, you can still see some of those agricultural references, right? We saw it in Eve and Adam in Genesis. They're there. Sometimes they're overturned, flipped completely, but they're still there. So she needs to visit the goddess of grain because she needs to rise again. Right? So she's there. She sees her temple in disarray. It's not been taken care of. And so she cleans everything up. And the goddess herself notices this and comes and says, hey, that was really cool of you to do that. Thank you. And Psyche says, if you could do something for me, Aphrodite's really angry at me, and Eros is really angry at me, and I really just need to find him. He's my love, and I did something very bad, and I want to see him again. And Ceres says, good luck with that, because I am not going to mess with Aphrodite. You're on your own. So eventually, Psyche makes her way to Aphrodite, and Aphrodite is pissed. She's angry throughout this whole story, but we're going to talk about that, about why that might be. And so she's given 4 tasks, right? It's often 3 tasks, in these stories, but I think you'll see why the fourth is maybe different. First, she must sort an enormous amount of seeds all in one evening. And this is impossible. But in fact, ants come to her aid, whole army of ants, and they say, yeah, we can fix this for you. What do you need? And so the ants all rush around and they sort the grain. And Aphrodite's like, wonder how she did that. All right, fine. Here's another task. There's a flock of sheep who are raging. I mean, I love that image, raging sheep, right? But I guess these were badass sheep, and they had golden wool. And so Aphrodite tells Psyche to go fetch some of that wool. Well, again, how are you going to do that? These are raging sheep. They're angry, and you can't catch them. So she goes to where the sheep are, and she's kind of scoping things out. And there's a reed by the riverbank, just a reed, just a plant there. And he tells her what to do. And he says, let them run around, just stay hidden, and then when they're gone, when they run through these bushes, it catches some of their wool. So all you have to do is just go to the bushes and gather the wool. Done. She's like, oh, thank you, that's awesome. It's a Greek translation. And then thirdly, Aphrodite tells her she must fill a flask with water from the treacherous waterfall of the river Styx. Okay, you see they're getting harder, kind of getting harder as we go along. So she goes to the river Styx, or goes to the opening of the river Styx, and again, she's just kind of standing around, and an eagle comes by and says, what are you doing? And she's like, well, I got to get this flask full of this water, and he's like, oh, I'll take care of that for you. So the eagle comes in and gets her the flask. And finally, and this is, of course, the most difficult task, she must go to the underworld and convince Proserpine, which we know as Persephone. She has to get a little bit of her beauty, put it in a box, and take it to Aphrodite. Really. And Persephone, as you may know, is the queen of the underworld. Again, here's just an echo of those agricultural myths, right? Because Persephone is winter. So when she's in winter, nothing grows. And then she's released from the underworld, and then things grow. So Psyche goes to the underworld, and she gets, all this help, this time from a tower. So we'll get into what those mean or what those might mean. The tower tells her, watch out. Yeah, you're going to the underworld. Be quiet, don't say anything as you pass by several ominous figures. A lame man driving a mule loaded with sticks. A dead man swimming in the river that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. Just be quiet, don't say anything. And old women weaving. Okay, watch out for those old women weaving. That's actually a very old trope in Greek mythology and literature, is the weaving. Calypso does it in the Odyssey, so does Penelope. I don't know if you remember, but Penelope's got, in the Odyssey, her husband Odysseus is gone. She's got like 100 suitors waiting to marry her, which is to say to take over Odysseus' property and kingdom. And she says, I'll marry you when I finish this scarf. And so she weaves it while they're there in the courtyard, and she unweaves it at night. It's a really old metaphor in Greek thought. So, yeah, that weaving does mean something. The tower warns that these people are going to try to get her attention, and she must not listen. She must not talk to them. The theme we're going to see next week, too. She must ignore them. He gives her some cakes, some barley cakes that she's supposed to throw to the dog Cerberus, who guards the entrance to Hades, so she distracts him. 2 coins for the ferryman, right? Karen. And then 2 coins so she can get back, right? So 1 coin to get across, the other to get back. Now, what she doesn't know, and what you may find more interesting that this doesn't happen by chance. This is Eros in the background working things out for her. So he's commanding the reed and the eagle and the tower and what's the other one? He's working through nature and in the last instance, culture, a tower, to aid his love. Because remember, he fell in love first. He was stuck by his own arrow. All right. And then there is the wonderful scene where she comes out of Hades and she's got the box of Persephone's beauty, right? And she wonders what a box full of beauty looks like. And so she opens it, and a deep, deep sleep, it's a different word in Greek that means something like death, comes over her, and she just passes out. And Eros now just cannot deal with this anymore. So he's like, all right, enough. I'm going to rescue my love. And you'll see in the next slide one of the famous paintings of this. There's actually quite a few paintings of this. Here's the text. Cupid, or Eros, feeling better now that his scar had healed because she did cut him in the process, could no longer endure the absence of his beloved Psyche, and dropped from the high window of the room where he'd been confined by his mother. With wings restored by his long rest, he flew all the more swiftly, and swooping to Psyche's side, he wiped away the sleep with care and returned it to the jar where it belonged. Then he roused her with a harmless touch of his arrow, saying, "Look how you've nearly ruined yourself again, poor child. Nearly ruined yourself again. With that insatiable curiosity of yours." Right? "Now be quick and finish the task my mother assigned. I'll take care of everything else." With this, he took lightly to his wings, while Psyche, for her part, swiftly carried Persephone's gift to Venus. There's the image, right? Beautiful. Psyche's always associated with purple. And like I said, that's not the Cupid you're going to see next week. This is very different. In fact, we'll talk about this. Cupid is actually present at creation, or Eros. Anyway, let me finish the story. So Eros persuades Zeus to allow him to marry this mortal, which must be, you must ask for permission to do that. And Zeus agrees, and finally Aphrodite agrees. She's the stereotypical mother-in-law, right? Does not want this to happen, very aggressive, very angry. But again, in the end, she relinquishes. And now there's a wedding. And the wedding of the gods is a great big party. It's awesome. It happens on Olympus. There's ambrosia and nectar. And Psyche drinks the nectar and becomes divine. Apotheosis, right? Here's the text. "O deities, inscribed in the roll call of the Muses, you know it all to be true that I raised this lad with my own hands. I've decided the impulses of his hot youth need curbing in some manner. We must take away the opportunity, restrain his childish indulgence with bonds of matrimony." That's where that started, right? If you know that notion, you should get married so you settle down, right? "He's found a girl." This is Zeus talking. "He's taken her virginity. Let him have her, hold her, and in Psyche's arms indulge his passions forever." And so Zeus spoke, and it was done. Presently, again from the text, presently a rich wedding feast appeared. The bridegroom reclined at the head, Eros, clasping Psyche in his arms. Zeus and Hera sat beside them, and all the deities in order. I love how Lucius takes a jab at Ganymede here. So he said, Ganymede, the cup-bearing shepherd lad. Sometimes the translation is that country boy. Ganymede, that country boy, served Zeus his nectar, that wine of the gods, and Dionysus served all the rest. How cool would it be to have Dionysus as your sommelier? Right? Awesome. While Vulcan cooked the meal, right? Now the hours adorned everyone with roses and hosts of other flowers. The graces scattered balsam. The choir sounded. Remember when we talked about the muses, we referenced this wedding. Apollo sang to the lyre, and Aphrodite danced charmingly to that outpouring of sweet music, arranging the scene so that the muses chimed together, and a satyr fluting away, and a woodland creature of Pan piping his reeds. So Psyche was given to marriage in Eros according to the rite. And when her term was due, a daughter was born to them both, whom we call pleasure. The soul, desire, pleasure. All right. Nice little story. Wonderful story. What does it mean? Well, it's obviously an allegory of the soul in some sense. I think probably Lucius meant it that way, the teller that we're dealing with. So Psyche equals soul. That's what it means. Eros means desire. Pleasure is born of the soul and desire. As I said at the beginning, I think this is designed to be Lucius, the golden ass, and his transformation into a servant, a priest, in fact, of Isis. Again, metamorphosis, transformation. It's very Neoplatonic in the sense that you're rising above the corporeal, you're rising above the material plane into the heavenly plane, because the material plane in Gnosticism and in Neoplatonism is corrupt. It's obviously corrupt because it changes. And the permanent, the ultimately real cannot change in Neoplatonism and Gnosticism. And so this is a little allegory of the soul rising, right? Psyche, the soul rising, and finally she's with the gods. There's some other interesting interpretations. Catherine, are you here? I think I saw you coming. We were trying to think of the name of this book, and it's Eric Newman's Amour in Psyche, 1956. And he says that, I don't know if you remember when Will Lynn was here, and he talked about the hero's journey, and I think it was Stephanie and Amanda maybe were asking about what's the female hero's journey. Well, Newman says it's this. It's the Psyche story. It's uniquely female. He says that Psyche's act ends the mythical age, this is very Jungian, ends the mythical age in the archetypal world, the age in which the relation between the sexes depended only on the superior power of the gods, who held men at their mercy. With Psyche, now begins the age of human love, in which the human psyche consciously takes the fateful decision on itself. Her insatiable curiosity, remember? And this brings us to the background of our myth, namely the conflict between Psyche, the new Aphrodite, and Aphrodite as Great Mother. Very interesting. So his argument is that this is a feminine separation from the goddess culture, a feminine separation. We know what a masculine separation looks like. Right? We saw it last week in Genesis. It's pretty brutal. It's pretty dark, and it reverses the poles of everything. Newman's arguing that Psyche does this. She separates from the goddess culture, represented by Aphrodite, by resisting Aphrodite. Sure, she acknowledges her power, but she ultimately overcomes her. And he makes it's the psychic development of the female. It's from heroism to love, he says, this paradigm shift. It's from heroism like Theseus, Perseus, Odysseus, to love, a story of love. Eros appears here, he says, as the masculine or the transcendent. We can talk about that, but he makes a lot about, he interprets a lot from the tasks. Remember the 4 tasks he was given? For Newman, this means a lot. He says, first, Psyche must sort out a seemingly impossible mixture of grains. Newman says that the mounds of seeds symbolizes an uroboric mixture of the masculine. Okay, he wrote that, I didn't write. Uroboric mixture of the masculine. Who knows what an Ouroboros is? Yeah, it's the snake eating its tail, symbol of the divine feminine, symbol of the great mother, symbol of the East as well, symbol of serpents in life that we talked about last time with Genesis. How serpents and women go together because they both represent life. Women they are life, they provide life. The serpent continues its life by shedding its skin. He says Psyche is, let me read it again now that you know what that is. The mound of seeds symbolizes an uroboric mixture of the masculine. All right? Masculine promiscuity, spread seed. Right? Psychologist. And the ants who assist her represent the chthonian powers, that's the powers that come up from the earth, right? Chthonium, associated with the vegetative nervous system. Okay. Psyche counters Aphrodite's promiscuity, this sense of excess that we've seen before, like Kali, just complete excess, right? This unbridled feminine energy, Shakti, or any other kind of feminine energy. Psyche counters this promiscuity, he calls it promiscuity, with an instinctual ordering principle. She puts things in order. Now, we typically associate that with the masculine. Newman does not. While Aphrodite holds fast to the fertility of the swamp stage, let's not even go there, which is also represented by Eros in the form of a dragon, a phallic serpent monster, Psyche possesses within her an unconscious principle which enables her to select, sift, correlate, evaluate, and so find her way among the confusion of the masculine. Now, that's a bit alien to me. I see the masculine as an ordering system, especially in terms of writing. But this is Newman. So he's arguing that this is almost an individuation process for women, this Psyche story. It's a break in the history of the Great Mother story, where that Psyche takes on this role of ordering, of structuring the universe, which you remember in Genesis was Adam by his naming. He names things and he orders things, right? Or even in the peace story, the first story in Genesis, and God saw that the light was day, and he said it was good, darkness, night, evening, morning, first, day, right? Ordering. That whole story is about different kinds of ordering. Okay, I think you can probably see where he's going with this. In the second task, Psyche must gather wool from dangerous sheep. Newman sees the rams as the destructive power of the masculine. Quote, the negative masculine death principle as experienced by the matriarchate and the reed which aids Psyche as the feminine vegetative wisdom of growth. All right, the feminine wisdom is to wait, to avoid confronting the rams, masculine, directly. That rings true for me, is that women can wait perhaps better than men. And in fact, may need to do that in order to deal with men at times. You all can comment on that as you see fit. All right, I'm not going to keep going. I think you see where this is going. It's highly symbol-laden interpretation, right? Which you can take or leave. But we also have Bruno Bettelheim, The Uses of Enchantment, 1975, who sees a lot in the symbols as well. I mean, this is Jungian analysis. This is mythological analysis. You make much of the symbols, and you should. This is Bettelheim, quote, in regard to the lamp. The story warns that trying to reach for consciousness before one is mature enough for it, or through shortcuts, has far-reaching consequences. Consciousness cannot be gained in one fell swoop. In desiring mature consciousness, one puts one's life on the line, as Psyche does when she tries to kill herself in desperation. I forgot to tell you she tried to do that. Incredible hardships Psyche has to endure suggests the difficulties that human beings encounter in the highest psychic qualities, Psyche, are to be wedded to sexuality. That's actually a very old notion that he's right about, where sexuality, at least before or without the influence of the Eden story, is a symbol of development, spiritual development at the very least, enlightenment at the most. And why wouldn't it be, right? Because the sexes are dual, and they represent, when the sex represents the union of the dual, the one. That's what most of these stories are about, getting to the one. Bettelheim makes much of the animal husband. He calls it the animal husband. So remember, she's initially betrothed to a monster, monsters always have some animalistic characters. But so does Eros, in a way. I mean, he has wings. He doesn't there, but he has wings. So he's like this hybrid. And Bettelheim says, to begin with, the prediction that Psyche will be carried off by a horrible snake gives visual expression to the inexperienced girl's formless sexual anxieties. These are psychologists. So it's going to be about sex. And Bettelheim says that for a young girl who's not had sex, that her first sexual encounter must appear monstrous because it's the projection of her anxieties about sex. The funeral procession, which leads Psyche to her destiny, I love that image. I mean, it's kind of dark, but I love it. The marriage funeral procession suggests the death of maidenhood, a loss not easily accepted. The death of childhood, ultimately, is what that is. It's a puberty, right? And there is a kind of death involved in puberty. The readiness with which Psyche permits herself to be persuaded to kill Eros, with whom she cohabits, indicates the strong negative feelings which a young girl may harbor against the man who has robbed her of her virginity. 1975, just saying. All right. Now, the end of the story for Bettelheim is sexual fulfillment. One woman has overcome her view of sex as something beastly. She's not satisfied with being kept merely as a sex object or relegated to a life of leisure and relative ignorance. For the happiness of both partners, they must have a full life in the world and with each other as equals. That these stories convey is most difficult to achieve for both, indeed, but it cannot be avoided if they wish to find happiness in life and with each other. Okay. Finally, this is really interesting. Lee R. Edwards, her book Psyche as Hero, Feminine Heroism in Fictional Form, 1979, and she's taking issue with Newman, Amor and Psyche. Here's what she says, that the structure is meaningful in itself. The young lovers as beautiful maiden and handsome youth. The inadequate or even hostile older generation. The separation of the pair, which results in the hero's quest and the trial by testing. The successful completion of seemingly impossible tasks, right? We know this story. The reunion in love and marriage of the initial couple grown older, wiser, and more worthy of each other's love, and the promised continuation of a newly established social order by what? By the birth of a child, right? She points out to Newman that for Jung, archetypes are not determined in terms of their content, they're determined by their form, right? So an archetype can have any meaning. It's simply a certain form. And if you look at history of world mythology, many meanings have been put into these archetypes. So she wants to warn Newman about gendering these archetypes, right? Which I think is a fair warning. So her argument, Lee Jacobs, is that this is not about female heroism, this is about heroism. So there's nothing uniquely feminine about this story, she says. She belongs with Odysseus, which is an interesting argument, isn't it? She says, what Newman fails to see, despite the brilliance of his analysis of Psyche's dilemma and resolution, and it is a well-known and well-received book, is that Psyche is not simply the female self on a quest for a particularly feminine kind of individuation, but it is rather the emblem of humanity whose actions, like those of Achilles, Odysseus, and Hamlet, and Ahab, resonate for all of us regardless of sex or gender. Newman's account of Psyche's hostility toward her sexuality, her fearfulness, passivity, and final apparent failure may be correct, but in emphasizing these characteristics as exclusively hers, he ignores what is most important and interesting about the tale, namely its presentation of Eros as sharing precisely the same qualities of Psyche. So she goes back through and rereads the story after Newman and says, hey, Eros has the same issues. Besides, he's a mama's boy, right? He has my issue, Psyche's issues, and he has other issues, right? So this was a wonderful moment for me. I hope you'll permit me. So one of my mentors at Emory University when I got my PhD was Walter Reed. He was chair of the English department. And Walt's just a good guy. And he's one of those guys you want to have a beer with. He'll never talk bad about anybody. So I'm reading Lee Edwards on the Psyche as hero, and I come across this passage. In discussing what he calls romantic heroism, Walter Reed, so I immediately stopped and wrote Walt. Dude, you're still alive. You're still out there. People are reading you, or at least I'm reading you. Walter Reed suggests that the heroic character, and I didn't realize this is very good. The heroic character tends toward freedom from the confines of plot. The heroic character overflows plot devices, which is why so many movies suck. Because they don't overflow the plot device. They fall right in line with the plot device, right? I'm looking at you, Marvel. Sorry if there's there's probably some people here. There seems to be something in the very nature of the hero, Reed suggests, which is incommensurate with any pattern of action externally perceived. Interesting. So we can't see the hero. We can't put the hero in a box. The hero is, by definition, outside of boxes. I like that. And so gender's not going to apply either, which is Edwards' point. This lack of correspondence between heroism and causality, the hero's apparent excessiveness and desire for radical change, is one factor that produces distance between the hero and the surrounding society. And if you see anything in this story, it is that. Eros is in conflict with Aphrodite. Psyche's in conflict with her family and her society. There's a whole interpretation about how this is about marriage and Psyche's reluctance to enter into marriage. The hero is outside of that, the desire for radical change. And that makes him or her exile from society, or at least at odds. But present psychological and literary theories, Edwards says, do not account for heroism in terms of this movement from cultural stasis to a newly constituted society, because that's what this is about ultimately. It's not about one person, it's about order. Let me say it again. This movement from cultural stasis through love, Eros, amour, to a newly constituted society characterized by openness and a revised definition of the communal order. You have my attention. Very interesting. We like the hero's journey because it fits a pattern, and I think that's fine. But we don't understand the hero's journey unless it overflows the pattern, unless it disrupts the pattern, unless it's outside of society. You may recognize some things from this story. Beauty and the Beast comes from this story, right? Cinderella, you probably heard that at the beginning, the three sisters, and two of them are bad. Rumpelstiltskin from the Brothers Grimm, Little Mermaid, Hans Christian Andersen. Some of you may be C.S. Lewis fans, right? C.S. Lewis. Till We Have Faces, his only, well, his not his only novel, but his most beloved novel for him. He retold this story. In fact, the subtitle of Till We Have Faces is a myth retold. Of course, he's going to put a Christian spin on it, but that's okay. It's a really good novel. And then, I never thought of this. So this is not my idea, but I actually found an article that argues pretty convincingly that The Devil Wears Prada is a retelling of the Cupid and Psyche myth in terms of Aphrodite and Psyche. So you know who's who there, right? It's a story, this scholar argues, of mentorship, of female mentorship. I don't know. For us, I think we know. This is about metamorphosis. We talk about metamorphosis here every Tuesday night in one way or another. Separation of the old Van Gennep cycle or stages, separation from the everyday world, initiation into a new world where you're disoriented, lost, and you may die. Return to the old world, which isn't old at all because you're new. And so there's a return to order for Psyche, but the old order wasn't actually ordered. The new order, notice the description of the marriage on Olympus. Everything's in order, right? Everybody's where they're supposed to be, right? Zeus, Hera, that country boy's right there. Everybody's where they're supposed to be. Order. This is also a creation story, right? Creation stories are about order emerging from chaos, right? So yeah, I think this is about metamorphosis. It's about change. It's about the gravity of the familiar, which we all feel. Just that pull of the everyday that keeps you from imagining something else, that keeps you from going to the cliff, that keeps you from hearing the oracle, that keeps you from going to the palace and having sex with a nameless person who says, "Don't look at me." Because that's what the sacred looks like. It doesn't look like anything you ever know. And it's dangerous and unknown. And then, of course, the consummation, where that disorientation, that fragmentation, that alienation are resolved into union. Maybe an ultimate union of the one, but at least a resolution like a musical scale, where you finally get back to the note where you started, right? Nick Young, resolution, musical resolution. You may not be surprised that Psyche is almost always associated with a butterfly. Now, just a couple more things, and then we'll talk about this wonderful story. A couple of poems. I hate this image. Jacques-Louis David, who's a brilliant painter. I'm not alone in hating this image. I did read an article that shows the nuances of this image, but I just can't get past Eros looking like he's a dumbass teenage boy who just had sex for the first time, right? What? Oh my God. Okay, now I'll never get rid of that thought. Thanks. So here's a poet named Sarah Barber who wrote a poem called Cupid Leaving the Bed of Psyche, parentheses, after Jacques-Louis David's Cupid and Psyche. So she kind of hates it too, but I thought it was cool. Under her body, he's caught his wing. That's how you know it's morning, and time, the god of love, made his exit. He rolls her over, grinning, as he'll do again forever, since the rising action of the sun is just one more dart in his erotic arsenal, a plaything for tracing the bones of the shoulder or tangling tomorrow in her hair. Ah, was the night so short again? Have we come to the dangerous time when somebody is waking a little too quietly while the other sleeps? In the myth, wax falls from a candle. If they're both awake now, it's time you made the classical gesture. Leave. That's Edvard Munch, by the way, Cupid and Psyche. And this is a poet named Leah Bobbitt, which I like very much. She was always the cerebral one. He was a tumult, a tempest, a true tribulation. But for him, she learned accounting to sort lentils, husbandry to pluck golden fleece, physics to contain beauty in a box. She was always the cerebral one. A scholar, he loved her for her mind. Her mother said she could do better. Her father told her it would all end in tears. But she shivered with the memory of stolen nights. He set her afire with inspiration, appreciated her beauty in the most basic ways. But he loved her for her mind. They only ever had one argument. It was many years later, after the ambrosia had burned through her veins. He sulked for a week. She hid in her books. She had called him a mama's boy. Thank you.